So I'm Denby, along with Emma. We both created this survey on tiger husbandry in the Australasian region. It was created sort of from us both being involved in introductions and breedings of Sumatran tigers when we were both at Auckland Zoo. And we found that there wasn't necessarily always easily accessible information for a lot of this sort of thing. And then that sort of spiraled, probably driven by our curiosity from myself and Emma, that we thought we could collate, ask the region. We know there's a lot of expertise regionally about tigers, a lot of experience with introductions, breeding histories, all those sorts of things. So we wanted to ask everyone and then collate the information from that wealth of experience and knowledge, and then hopefully provide it back in some way that hopefully someday in the future there might be someone who has a question and it might contribute towards them being able to find an answer or find some direction towards who they should be talking to for an answer. So we have got a slideshow today, but we've actually created a longer document that sort of goes through some of the data that we've gone through already, compares it to wild state tigers that of information we could find, as well as scientific literature that we thought was relevant. The survey was distributed to 17 different facilities across Australasia, and we had 13 out of those 17 give us a result back. So pretty happy with that in terms of results. We were able to capture an enormous amount of information. And yeah, this is a bit of an overview of it. And yeah, like Sheila said, if people do have questions, feel free to interject, because we sort of have broken it down into different topics. So it sort of makes sense that way, I think. But over to you, Emma.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so like Denby said, we've kind of broken it down into different sections because that was the easiest way to kind of get the snapshots of the data. So first up is just collection details. The data that is presented here is only from the 13 facilities that did participate. So this age sex distribution chart includes both the Sumatran and hybrid tigers that are within the region. You can kind of see that breakdown on the side there of how many facilities have or hold Sumatran and how many hold hybrid. In our collection so far, we do have majority Sumatran, so we've got 36 Sumatrans over 17 hybrid. And like Denby said, throughout the rest of this kind of document and slideshow, what we've done is draw comparisons to wild Sumatran tiger behaviour, but that does, or wild Sumatran tiger habitat rather, sorry. But that does not discount the importance of the information that we gathered from those facilities that have the hybrid tigers as well. So then the second section, I guess you'd say, is the environment, and this was quite a large section, so it's broken down into a few different bits, so bear with me. But you can see here we've got a table to kind of compare the basic environmental data, and while our region is comparatively similar to wild Sumatran tiger habitat in terms of daylight hours, we can see that there is quite a noticeable difference between temperature ranges and average rainfall experience between tigers in our care and wild Sumatran tigers. And while we have the temperature range sitting at 10 to 30 degrees Celsius as your kind of average overall, there were also 9 out of 13 facilities that noted temperatures did drop below 5 degrees Celsius on a seasonal basis as well. So it's substantially lower than that kind of 22 to 35 degrees Celsius range that a wild Sumatran tiger would be exposed to. Another one that was quite interesting and very obviously different is that average yearly rainfall of Sumatran tigers being so much higher than what we actually have throughout Australasia. And there's very little data or evidence available to kind of determine how that difference in environmental kind of aspects or conditions may impact our animal health and behaviour for tigers in our care. We then asked a series of kind of basic provision questions. So again, you can see very easily and quickly, we've used a lot of pie charts in this because it's a very nice, easy way to kind of show snapshots of data. But you can see that all facilities provided shelter and hides and water bodies. We had 92.3% that provide artificially heated areas, while just under half provide artificially cooled areas. However, if we look back to that kind of wild average temperature range, that does kind of seem quite justified in terms of the fact that we are slightly cooler than the average range, so providing heat is important, whereas cooling areas down is probably less significant because we are already a cooler climate than what smoke-tailed tigers arguably live in. The next part of the environment was more about getting some kind of data on the size and the space of the habitats that we've got in the region, and then comparing that not only to two different documents, but also drawing some comparison to averages in the Americas as well. So you can see here, we've got our Australasian standards, which is the bottom one. So standards for exhibiting carnivores in New South Wales. 300 meters squared is the kind of like baseline average, which is already twice the size of the AZA, which is the American standards. And then you can see very nicely and very clearly that our survey range was significantly larger at 720 to 4,000 meters squared, which is pretty awesome, I think, to kind of see that clear evidence that we are already going above and beyond the kind of minimum standards that we have set, not only in Australasia, but also in America. And then again, just a kind of cool little data point. So the typical exhibit size in the AZA region varies from 232 to 929 meters squared, with an average of 510 meters squared, compared to ours, which, like I said, is that 720 to 4,000. That gives us an average of 1,890 meters squared. So we are nearly 3 times, or just over 3 times, the average size of the American habitat spaces as well. And then our next section, I'm boosting through it today. Our next section was tiger management. So this was more about kind of starting to get down into the nitty-gritties of how people were managing tigers, either in social situations or in terms of the kind of spaces that they have. Again, with the environment aspect, we had acknowledgement that I believe it was all of the facilities had at least 2 tiger habitat spaces, and whether or not that could link then into rotational aspects. So I'll touch on that in a second. Before we go too much further though, so all 13 survey participants confirmed that they do manage tigers in their care in protected contact via free contact, and we know that that's a more recent shift and change in the last couple of years. And then, like you can see here in front of you, we have got 53.8% of facilities that manage some of the tigers in their care in social situations. So not all of the tigers, just some kind of thing. So there may be a slight discrepancy in terms of the total number of tigers that are actually managed in social settings. But that was quite hard to break down. The groupings within the region only consisted of mother and cubs or siblings with no unrelated peers. And the groupings had been together for varied amounts of time, ranging from only 6 months through to 17 years. Some of the participants acknowledged issues with group holdings, such as aggression leading to minor injuries, whilst others had no issues or concerns. It's also quite interesting to note that we have no groupings within the region consisting of breeding pairs. Comparatively, it's noted that many tigers in the EEP, so the EASA ex situ program, are consistently managed together throughout the year. So that's kind of quite a unique and different management style between Europe and Australasia. And then moving through to...
Chat has a question. Sorry, Emma.
Oh, yep, go for it.
Sorry to interrupt your flow. This is all very, very interesting. Did there seem to be a link in the increased holding of breeding pairs together in EASA with facilities having less habitats available, or was it, or we didn't have that data from EASA?
Didn't have that data specifically in terms of what habitat size or how much, like how many habitats they had available. That was from their recommendations that we took that from, that they had actually noted that majority of their pairs were kept together, and they actually highlighted the fact that most of the pairs in the SSP, which is the American Survival Tiger Plan, are also kept separate most of the time. So we follow more in line with the American kind of system in terms of managing males and females apart, whereas most European facilities were keeping breeding pairs together.
Thank you.
No worries. Yeah, so yeah, moving on. So facilities that can rotate tigers between multiple habitats. So this again links back to that having multiple spaces available. And interestingly enough, we had on average in our facilities at least 2 to 5. So that was our kind of range of habitat spaces that people had. And you can see here that 76.9% of facilities acknowledge that they can and do rotate tigers between spaces. The frequency has been broken down, so there was quite a range in terms of what people were doing and how they were deciding to do rotations. So we've either got multiple moves per day, moves once per day, multiple moves per week, or other. For the participants that were classified or categorized as other, they had described setups that ranged from either continuous access to multiple habitats for a single tiger, and that may have been because they only had a single tiger in their care, or rotations occurring only once a month, or there was no set process to promote more variety. So that was kind of the wide range that we had encompassed in that other. And then again, interestingly, what we wanted to kind of do was create easy to read data presentations. So we've used a few of these word cloud diagrams throughout the presentation, and the size of the text does indicate how often that was used, or that kind of keyword was said in the answers or the responses from the participants. So for reasons behind rotation, or what's dictating the rotation on the day or the week for that tiger, you can see very clearly that enrichment was the top recorded reasoning or method for it, followed closely by encounters, and then estrus and animal behavior. And it was quite interesting also to note, so we didn't create a diagram for this, but we also did kind of ask about the form and frequency of access between tigers. And what we found is that it's really highly varied across the region due to the facility design and the holding capacity and the breeding status of the animals. So we found that auditory access was not limited at any facilities. So all the facilities, all the tigers can hear each other. The olfactory access was very commonplace, but only with facilities that could rotate, which again, fairly standard. And then the interesting one was that visual access, again, was very dependent on facility design, with direct mesh contact only being recorded in cases where survey participants had actually bred or were maintaining a breeding relationship between a breeding pair. So, you know, spaces that haven't had animals put together weren't necessarily having any exposure with that mesh contact between unrelated individuals. Another really cool thing that kind of came out of this part of the survey was that we actually had 2 participants note that they were involved in a scent swap program between their facilities, which increased the olfactory experience of the tigers in their care. So that's bringing in entirely new tiger smells, which is a very cool form of enrichment, but something that's very limiting in terms of the tigers that we hold in our own individual facilities, because we can only move scents around so much before they're very aware of which scent is whose scent. So quite a cool, I think, unique addition to enrichment for tigers in zoo settings. We then wanted to kind of look into the way that we manage tigers overnight. So again, historically, conventional housing methods for zoo animals have included shutting them overnight, shutting them inside overnight, and in certain localities, this is still definitely the case either for extreme weather or management philosophy. You can see here we had majority of our participants, so 84.6%, say that they leave their tigers with access to habitat overnight, with a small portion that don't leave access. So that was the assumption that they do shut them inside overnight. However, just to note, for our facilities in the region, the ones that shut them or shut off access to habitat had significant back of house spaces. So that's kind of quite a unique aspect of the Australasian area, again, because looking at average holding sizes for American facilities, it was about 9 meters squared, whereas ours was don't want to misquote myself, but ours was anywhere from 24 up to 4,500 meters squared for a back of house space. So very, very big range of sizes available of back of house spaces and what we're determining as back of house. The thing or the reason why we generally like to say that we want to give animals access overnight outside is because we generally accept that tigers have naturally high levels of crepuscular and nocturnal activity, and it's preferable to give them the space to perform activities if they so choose. But interesting enough, comparatively, the daily activity patterns of wild Sumatran tigers is fairly under-researched and unknown, and there's been only a single study conducted in the Waikambas National Park which showed wild tigers were not exclusively nocturnal, and they actually had a high recorded activity budget of 42% during daylight hours, followed by 32% at nighttime, and then 26% for crepuscular hours. So this could kind of indicate a potential spot or gap in kind of our knowledge and give the region a chance to kind of do a little bit more research and comparative behavioural analysis between how we're actually managing tigers in our care compared to wild tiger activity budget to see if we can kind of be more flexible with some of our management of tigers and potentially encourage more activity during daylight hours if they are known to be more active at that point in time. We then also asked just kind of the reasons behind shutting tigers in back of house spaces. So this was external to overnight access. This was if there was an extended period of time that you had to shut an animal in, what were your reasons for it? And again, very clearly, the very common denominator is always the extreme weather, followed closely by that habitat maintenance. Over to you, Jimmy.
Cool, thank you. So we asked also about weight body condition scores. We found that 84.6% of facilities that responded use a body condition scoring system. The frequency of that use and the frequency of weighing varied a lot between lots of different facilities, as you can see from those graphs. So using a combination of those to make the management decisions about your animal's weight and body condition. And we also asked how those decisions are made, and everyone responded that it was always keeper, veterinary staff, team management collaborating on making those decisions. But when we then looked into the body condition scoring systems that were used, we asked if there were specific ones that were being used regionally. We found that 18.2% of facilities used a specific body condition score chart to their facility. 36.4% were unspecified, and the remaining 45.4% specified using the AZA Feeled Body Condition Guidelines. So looking on the AZA Nutrition Advisory Group website, there are 2 documents for Feeled Body Condition scoring systems, but they are both specific to lions. So we thought this was quite interesting and demonstrates an opportunity for the region to collaborate together potentially to create a tiger-specific body condition scoring system that could be used. Sheila, did you have a question?
I don't have a question, but I do have a body conditioning score chart that was developed, I want to say, in the UK that I can share with this group in the near future. I just have to dig it out. It's actually quite good, and it's specific to tigers, so I can absolutely share that with you guys if you're interested.
Great. I'm sure everyone would be. So we thought it could be an opportunity for, as Sheila said, where there's one, if there is one that is appropriate, using that for the region to have a singular body condition scoring system to allow comparison of body condition and weights in a more objective way across the region. And then if you want to go to the next slide, Emma. So we looked into diet and enrichment, looking at how diet amount is calculated. Every facility reported tailoring their diet amounts specifically to each individual cat. They weren't having a blanket rule of amount of food that they were giving. We had 76.9% choose to do a volume-based feeding amount, 15.4% calorific-based, and 7.7 was an unspecified amount. So that was equivalent to one facility that did a sort of rotational and varied amount of food, that there was no set process to doing that. And then we looked at how often that food was presented. So we had 61.5% of facilities feeding 5 or more times weekly, 23.1% feeding daily. And looking at this, it's quite an interesting thing because obviously we know for wild behaviour, tigers aren't necessarily eating every day. So trying to understand how the impacts of feeding frequency might be impacting animal behaviour, might be impacting animal weight, and understanding if there's any sort of links between behaviour, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, and how that food might sort of link into that potentially. So then we dug a little bit deeper into diet presentation and asked if carcass feeding was offered and fasting periods were utilised. So we had 69.2% of surveys respond that they did do carcass feeding, but the form and frequency of what a carcass is in the region is pretty varied across lots of different places. Some places referred to offering whole carcasses, some did gutted carcasses, some did large pieces of certain animal types, and there was a weight range of 5 kilos up to 50 kilos in terms of the presentation of a carcass amount. The primary reasons that were cited for using carcass feeding included promoting natural behaviours, reducing stereotypic pacing, and providing prolonged satiety or rest periods to tigers that were in human care in the region. And interestingly, we then asked if there was any perceived benefits or negatives from doing carcass feeding. We had 100% of facilities that took part in carcass feeding say that they saw a perceived behavioural benefit from doing so. So I think that's a pretty interesting reflection that there is a whole agreement of everyone who is doing it that they do see a benefit. And then we draw a comparison in the longer document to a European study that suggests carcass feeding is physically and cognitively challenging and can be used more frequently in captive settings to mimic natural behavioural feeding ecology, but also possibly contribute to positive welfare outcomes if it is available. We also looked historically in the region and we found a paper that was published by Sheila back in 2005 that demonstrated that the region has been providing carcass feeding opportunities for tigers for quite a long time. And this is not necessarily consistent with other regions. We know that there are some differences in other regions in terms of how they present their food, and the shift in moving towards whole carcass feeding and things like that have been not as previously uptaken. And then looking at fasting periods, we had a total of 84.6 survey participants say that they used fasting periods. And we asked for a definition of fasting periods and found that there was an enormous amount of variety across the region in terms of what a fasting period is actually constituted of. Out of those people, oh, sorry, the lights just turned off. There we go. Out of those survey participants that said yes, 38.5% reported that their fasting periods were still food to mouth days. It was just smaller amounts than what was typical of a normal day. And we found a reference from the AZA Tiger Husbandry manual that just reiterated that fasting days are not exact replicas of fasting behaviour in the wild. And then drew a comparison to a similar European study by the same authors that we mentioned with the carcass feeding that found potentially there should be gorge feeding opportunities occurring before fasting periods because that closer mimics natural behaviour and provides those positive benefits that we have seen from the surveys that they've said, yes, there is a positive benefit from carcass feeding to then flow on and have fasting occur after that. When we asked if there was any perceived positives or negatives with fasting periods, we didn't have as 100% positive. We had 77% indicated that there was perceived benefits, but there was that smaller amount of 23% of survey participants that indicated that they could associate fasting periods with some behavioural or management issues, such as increased pacing or unsettled behaviour. So we think, yep, Sheila?
Sorry, Denby, I'm just
That's
curious to know that, you know, in regards to that survey information about the uncertainty of fast days that you just stated, Could that
Yeah.
be because potentially there's been a lower ratio of carcass fed to the individuals? You know, as you said, there's such an array of weight differences between what people perceive to be a carcass and
Yeah.
what potentially we would think is actually a carcass, as in a weight component there. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
definitely. It does make sense. We probably don't have that captured just because it is pretty unique to the situation, I guess, of like what a facility has available and then how that impacts their individual animal. Um, there is some research around wild tiger prey species that shows that typically Sumatran tigers will hunt um, wild pig, barking deer, and macaques and sambar deer with high frequency. And if you look at the average weight sizes of those animals, they're actually considerably lower. They're all nearly under 50 kilos. So potentially the amount of food that is needed could be something that maybe the Field Husbandry Advisory Group or regionally there's some collaboration on what does constitute a beneficial amount of carcass without sort of having that negative impact of not being quite enough. But yeah, it's a really good point that we don't think we have the exact information to capture that one.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Demby, and I know that's something that the Field and Husbandry Advisory Group is actually discussing at the moment and trying to make some amendments where we think regionally we could see some benefits in providing that information to everyone to basically sit alongside your the work that you guys have done. I think that'd be great.
Yeah. And then if you want to go to the next slide, please, Emma. Thank you. So we asked if spike feeds were used. So for those who aren't sure what a spike feed is, it's defined as diet offered as extra from normal dietary amounts that are used as a management tool to manage weight or behaviour in several facilities. So you can see 61.5% of survey participants said that yes, they do use spike feeds as a management tool. And again, we had 100% of survey participants listing using evidence-based approaches to weight, body condition score, and behavioural monitoring in consultation with their animal care and veterinary nutrition staff to make changes to their animal diets. This graphic that we've got here, again, like Emma said, the word size is representative of the frequency of a type of animal that is being fed out to tigers. So there's a lot of variation. I'm pretty sure, but I'd have to maybe double check that there was no meat type that was fed across every facility. There was always one that wasn't quite captured by somewhere. And interestingly, like I mentioned with the feeding ecology of wild Sumatran tigers, pig makes up the primary part of their diet. But as you can see from this word cloud, it's one of the least fed things in the region. Potentially that's due to availability of wild pig and of course the nutritional difference between feeding a domestic pig and a wild pig. They're obviously quite a different thing. But then a second most wild fed thing would be deer, and we can see deer's pretty well represented, fed by a lot of facilities regionally. So that was just an interesting thing that we thought stuck out from some of the data. And then we just had a little note. We have a thing, sorry, Emma, a note on enrichment. We did ask a few questions on enrichment, but we weren't able to capture maybe exactly what we wanted in terms of if there was certain types of enrichment that impact tiger behaviour and welfare outcomes in a particular way. And there's, I'm sure many of you know, there's quite a large body of evidence research around enrichment practices in zoos specifically for large carnivores. But we do see this as a potential opportunity for the region to collaborate on what types of enrichment are actually impacting tigers the most and sharing that information to get new ideas and potentially benefit their tigers. Back to you, Emma.
Cool, thank you. So the next section that we delved into was behaviour-based monitoring in the facilities around the region. And as you can see, 76.9% of the facilities that participated in this survey do have CCTV access in their tiger care facilities. So whilst it's a relatively high number that have this technology, it was actually only a very small number that indicated regular review of behaviour using the technology. So only 6 of the 10 that have CCTV review on a regular basis. So they review only for focus studies, specific situations, or only when keeper time permits. 3 mentioned consistent daily review. However, only a single facility reviews on a consistent time period on a daily basis and was able to provide quantitative data about the Tigers' activity budgets. All of the facilities that acknowledged using it, the reasons for using CCTV technology was to monitor individuals where there was a concern about behaviour. So the performance of stereotypies was one of the commonly recorded or noted ones. Health concerns, conspecific interactions, estrus monitoring, breeding introductions, monitoring mother-cub interactions, and for the analysis of management practices and its impact on activity budgets. So obviously circling back around to kind of noting that pacing behaviour being one of the kind of key reasons why we do behavioural observations on tigers in our care. Pacing has been well documented and described as a stereotypic behaviour in tigers in multiple publications and is considered an indicator of compromised welfare. From several studies that we drew upon, we found a kind of a range of time spent performing it ranging from 1.4 to 43.26%. So quite a wide, varied range. Like I said, that was from several papers. We had 61.5% of participants acknowledge observable pacing patterns with tigers in their care, with 1 facility reviewing and recording the time spent performing that behaviour in an evidence-based manner on a daily basis. There were 2 others that provided average pacing values from historic studies. However, no other participants could provide or did provide any data. So from that limited data, we had pacing values in our region ranging from 1.4 to 21.6%. So that sits within that range that we're seeing from those multiple other studies as well. I think it's also really important to note as well that multiple other survey participants noted that they used anecdotal evidence to recognise pacing behaviour. So that was the presence of worn pathways or an increase in male pacing noted consistently during female estrus cycles. We also had multiple participants note that there was a significant amount of individual variation between tigers held at the same facility. So that indicates to us that management practices may actually impact individuals in very different ways. And then following on from that, we also wanted to ask how people intervene or what different things people do to try and help mitigate or manage that stereotypic behaviour that we're seeing with tigers in our care. And again, very clearly, very obviously, enrichment is that top mentioned one, followed very closely by habitat rotation, spike feeds, and in-carcass feeds. It was also really interesting to see that there's actually a few of these ones that are nearly complete opposites of each other. So we had multiple facilities that noted increasing visual contact or providing direct mesh access between compatible tigers actually decreased pacing, whilst others had the opposite, where it was reducing that visual contact or removing that visual contact would reduce the pacing behaviour seen with their individuals. So again, just kind of teeing back to that, there's not necessarily one management process or one step to take that will work for all tigers in our care, and that we can probably work at being a little bit more flexible with how we manage tigers to suit the individual as well. We then wanted to kind of explore a little bit further with anticipatory pacing, and the majority of survey participants acknowledged the presence of anticipatory pacing with tigers in their care, and they anecdotally related this all back to feeding times, scheduled encounters, or daily events, and the arrival of keepers. So you can see 84.6% acknowledged that they see some form of anticipatory behaviour. Obviously, again, this is one of those things that can be really hard correctly identifying and distinguishing anticipation versus stereotypic behaviour. And we suggest that increased observations on tigers in our care may lead to a better understanding of what temporal patterns and contextual cues our current management systems are actually exposing tigers to, and highlight areas where maybe increased flexibility in management may benefit tigers behaviourally. And then one of the kind of final parts of the behavioural stuff. This is one of the ones that I found really quite interesting, and we're quite passionate about, because again, the whole kind of point of this survey was to then draw it into how this all links to reproductive success of tigers in the Australasia region. So this was drawing a comparison, or looking for a behavioural change noted with females before and after breeding success. And we obviously just want to note that obviously the importance of species typical behaviour is well evidenced in promoting positive welfare outcomes for animals in zoos, and the ability to breed provides opportunities for species typical behaviour that we may find very difficult to replicate otherwise. But we also acknowledge that breeding can't happen in every single facility. And obviously that's a very controlled aspect of being in a zoological society. So while it's beneficial, it's not necessarily something that we can all achieve. However, still super interesting to kind of see some of this data coming out. So from the survey participants, we saw 23.1% see a change in stereotypic behaviour with the female before and after. A small portion saw no change, and then the vast majority either didn't answer or found it was irrelevant or not applicable to their facility. So again, acknowledging that there is some facilities that don't have the opportunity or the option to breed, so it doesn't really relate to them in this case. One of the facilities that did see a change, they used evidence to support that claim of change. All the others were anecdotal. The evidence-based example again used CCTV technology to record data, and they actually had well-documented totals for both a historical female and a current female, and both of those female tigers had seen a decrease in pacing behaviour after the birth of their cubs. The other two survey participants that saw or noted changes before and after actually noted increases in pacing versus decreasing. One of them was directly after birth, so an increase in pacing directly after. That decreased after visual barriers were installed between conspecifics. And then the second noted no change around birthing itself, but rather saw a peak or an increase in pacing for the female once she started cycling again, but while she still had cubs living with her. So again, just drawing that back, we believe this highlights an area for potential further research in the region, as there's a gap in the literature that specifically investigates the positive behavioural and health impacts that breeding may have on tigers and human care. And back to you, Dembe.
Cool, thank you. One of the big focuses of the survey was looking at reproductive success in the region, and comparing it to other regions and things that can and can't benefit potentially. And to do this, we looked at not only our surveys, but the SMP annual report and recommendations made from 2004 to 2024, and then cross-reference those against each other to make sure that we were hopefully capturing as much data as we could. And over those 20 years, there are a total of 68 breeding recommendations that were made for Sumatran tigers in Australasia. And of these 68 recommendations, 48 recommendations were recorded as an attempted introduction. This results in a 70.59% rate of attempted introductions from breeding recommendations. But of those that were attempted, only 35.4% resulted in success. And we define success as successful mating and a resulting pregnancy, and not necessarily cubs. And in cases where an introduction was attempted but unsuccessful, there was a lot of different reasons for that, but the factors included behavioural incompatibility, animal age, animal fertility, absorption of litter in utero. They were some of the reasons that were listed for not achieving success. So this is an equivalent success rate for the region for 20 years of 25% from breeding recommendations achieving successful breeding. But this does include recommendations that were made over consecutive years and were unable to be fulfilled for logistical reasons such as import or transfer delays. I know that COVID impacted potentially import of a few animals and stuff like that. Animal age and health and behavioural incompatibilities. But behavioural incompatibilities were consistently noted to impact breeding success for pairings, and consideration for behavioural compatibility has been highlighted as an important consideration when considering to do an introduction for a pair of tigers. So then we looked at introductions and found that breeding introductions where males and females were being introduced together, there was a recorded regional average of 12 days for introductions, but these were skewed by two records of tigers, a pair of tigers that were kept in the same enclosure for extended periods of time. So if we omit these from the records, the regional average is 4.95 days for an introduction to occur. And then we asked that indicators that facilities would use from their animals' behaviour to commence introductions. So facilities that did answer noted that behaviours intensified in the lead up to a female's estrus period. Female indicators that were frequently reported included calling, increased chuffing, cheek rubbing, rolling in the presence of a male, and lordosis position. Male indicators include increased chuffing, intensified calling, urine spraying, cheek rubbing, and restlessness or increased activity. It was noted by several facilities that had bred that male behaviour was more the indicator that they were looking for, and they found that that was more indicative of the time to introduce, because some of those female indicators could be more frequent outside of the female's estrus period. And then looking at indicators to separate, so this is on days of the introduction, so of animals being together, not necessarily choosing not to put them back together at all. But a decreasing frequency of mating attempts was listed by several facilities as an indication to separate pairs during an introduction, as well as animals choosing to spend time in more distant areas of the space. Aggression between pairs was noted in a few surveys, but it was noted to occur with increasing frequency and intensity, towards the end of the female tiger's estrus period in some facilities. We found that the average length of an estrus period for the region is 7 days, and we got an average for parturition. Oh, light's gone again. Average parturition time is 5 hours and 10 minutes. We did try and find data on cub birthing intervals. We didn't get enough data for that, but we did have 20 to 30 minutes reported twice. But the initial parturition time is skewed quite a bit by a unique record of one animal giving birth to a cub and then giving birth to a second cub 2 days later. So if we admit that, there unfortunately wasn't really enough data to have a good answer to the average length of birthing interval for cubs. Now, during the survey period, we had 52 Sumatran tiger cubs that were born in that 20-year period. 11.54% did not survive birthing or the immediate period after birth, and 15.38% did not survive to 2 years of age. Regionally, the population experiences a survival rate of 84.62% to 2 years of age. So we were able to compare this to the EEP and the AZA populations. First year mortality, so to the age of 1, first year mortality in the EEP is 42%, so was surprisingly high for us to find that. While in the AZA population, first year mortality is 11%. Our first year mortality is 13.4%, so much more in line with the AZA. The reason for the increased mortality in the EP is currently unknown, but there was some references to potential changes in intervention protocols when animals were giving birth or cubs were being raised, as well as training frequency potentially varying between regions and impacting the comfortability of cats to caregivers being around. Emma, if you want to, thank you. We found, so that's just a little graph showing you sort of our survival rate over the 20-year period. We also found that out of facilities that had received breeding recommendations, 80% were able to successfully achieve those at some time. And 87.5% of survey participants had success in breeding, had staff that had previously had experience with breeding in some form. We didn't go into that too much in terms of what that experience was, whether it was just sort of knowledge passed on from doing it, learning from others, that sort of thing. But there is some other studies that have shown that there is a positive correlation between staff experience with introductions and breeding success in America. And we found that the EEP long-term management plan for Sumatran tigers that was published through the EARSA region specified that keeper exchanges could be a potential tool for their region to experience tiger breeding, introductions and births. But we definitely think that, again, is a regional opportunity to collect more data around future breeding events and contribute to a body of information that helps everyone make really effective breeding decisions, breeding plans, and let staff understand what a typical breeding introduction, pregnancy, birth, and cub development is for tigers in human care in the region. And I think that's pretty much it for us.
Thank you, Debbie and Emma. This has been fantastic research that you guys have put into it, and we really appreciate you sharing it. I think you both should be really proud of getting these kind of results, because actually all it does is enhance everybody's knowledge in this space. So congratulations and thank you for showing that initiative to get that out there. I'm going to hand it over to see if anyone has any questions for the two of you before we finish up.
Oh, thanks. We'd also just like to quickly thank everybody that did participate in the survey as well, and a massive thanks to Sheila and Lauren Booth at the time, who was also the tag co-convener, for showing their support and endorsing this and helping get it out there, and also the Feeled Husbandry group for also supporting this effort too. And obviously long term, what we're hoping to do is actually share the finished results. So we'll hopefully publish and share the results in an easy to read format. Hopefully we'll share it on this Facebook page, and we'll hopefully also get it out through the Feeled Husbandry Advisory Group as well. So it will be in a format that people can kind of access and refer to. So yeah, thank you very, very much.
Does anyone have any questions for Demby or Emma before we let you all go? I'm just really chuffed. Oh, we're just getting little notes put in saying everyone's had a great time and thank you. They appreciate the work you've done. But yeah, we do really appreciate this. And I think that's a great initiative for any keeper from any organisation. Don't be afraid to reach out to the Carnivore Tag, and we will help you where we can, because all of this is really about learning and sharing information. So any of you that are in our audience at the moment, if you have any ideas or any research that you'd really like to conduct, or those burning questions, please let us know and we can steer you in the right direction, or at least support whatever you want to come up with. We've got a question here. Sorry, I don't know. It just disappeared, from Laura. Laura, are you still there?
Yeah, we're here, Sheila.
Did you put your hand up for a question?
Oh, I just
or
put
just
in
put
the
something
chat.
in the comments?
Okay. Yeah, Mon and I were just wondering, one of the things that was mentioned as a factor in the cub mortality was training. And we were wondering, did that refer to keeper training, like the knowledge of the keepers, or was that animal training?
So it was in the long-term management plan for the EEP that they were comparing the cub mortality rates of AZA and EEP, and it was just theorized that potentially the training of animals and the frequency that was occurring maybe contributed to animals being more comfortable having people around, whereas there was more of a hands-off approach potentially in Europe that had an impact on female behavior when she was having having issues around pregnancy and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Interesting.
I think that might be it, guys. I don't see anyone else's hands up. You were very informative. I can't say thanks again too many more times, but I'm really chuffed by the information that you've presented today and the work that you've put into this space. So again, look forward to seeing it published somewhere.
Thanks, Sheila.
Yeah, somewhere. We'll get it out there. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm just stopping the recording now.
Oh. That went pretty well.
It went very well.
Yeah,
Honestly, guys. No, look, I'm so excited about that research, like, and the
Yeah.
information you've got. So my hat's off to you. I guess, I find it frustrating that we're still having these conversations about feeding carcass and the benefits
Yeah.
there, 20 years later,
Yeah.
and how our reference points are generally based on AZA, whereas I think we're more in line culturally with the European side of doing things.
Yeah.
But we're now getting more and more pressure about potential public perception, etc., when you're feeding
Yep.
out large carcasses.
Yep.
And I just think, why go down that rabbit hole? It's just anecdotally that this is the theory. There's no real evidence based about it unless you're an
Yeah.
American. And the other thing in regards to the information you have about pacing and the papers that have been referenced, I do question myself whether pacing has really been pacing or misdiagnosed when it's been traveling in some of those instances,
Mm.
because again, I think it comes down to people's knowledge of the individuals,
Yeah.
an understanding of really, and I'm not disputing that tigers or any cats pace in captivity. I'm not disputing that at all. But I do wonder if what people are seeing and assuming are pacing are actually traveling patterns, which is very normal. And that's where that CCTV footage could really help the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And
And
that to me was one of the biggest surprises from our findings, was the sheer lack of facilities actually using that technology to do regular observations.
Yeah.
Because
They're
it's
more in
such a
place for
good
security, I
tool.
think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's such a, like, zoos do need to go start down the route of using technology more, because it's there. It's there. It's
absolutely.
The biggest thing is keeper time. It's having the time to sit there and watch them. But then again, as technology improves, as AI technology starts coming through, we'll probably start being able to have some kind of, like, things that just watch it for us and tell us what behavior patterns they're picking up.
And again, I'd be me, as old as I am, I'd be questioning that. I'm going, well, is it really? Because yes, this could look like that. And and again, I've had these debates off and on for my whole career with carnivores. It's like, to me, pacing is in the true sense of the word, for me, it is that constant, whether it's loops, circles, up and down, and you're saying, hello, Fred Tiger, you're the keeper, and they are not paying any attention to you. They're still set in their motion. Whereas if you go, hello, Fred Tiger, and he comes over and chuffs and has an interaction and then goes back on his merry way and does a lap and then comes back, to me, that is not pacing.
I understand it's very hard to differentiate. And like I said, it's very hard for people to differentiate between anticipation behavior and stereotypical behavior. Because it looks very similar. So it's like, yeah. But no, I will let you go. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us today. And I think we need to open this can of worms again a bit more and tease it out at some point.
Absolutely.
So
it could be a good discussion.
Thanks again.
For your advisory group.
Cheers. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.